Blue Collar Millionaires, we've got a special guest today, Alex Duta. I met him through Facebook, and that should tell you the power of social media. You really should be a producer and not a consumer when it comes to social media. Alex is definitely a producer. Me and him share similar backgrounds with our primary businesses. And me and Kevin are super excited about you being on. Alex, tell us a little bit about where you got started and bring us up to present day so people can hear this just pretty much, in my opinion, amazing story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris and Kevin, for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. I love shining my light and sharing stories back into the community with the hope of inspiring others. I feel like when I was younger, I could have used a lot more inspiration. And a lot of times we have these self-limiting beliefs of, oh, XYZ isn't doable. So but I guess my story is kind of simple. I started a variety of different businesses straight out of actually even in high school. I had a snow removal business, and that story is a funny one, but I won't focus too much on that. And then once I graduated high school, started college, my father and I were sitting on a beach in Mexico, and we were kind of tinkering around with the idea of starting a restaurant. His backstory was we're both first generation immigrants from actually Romania, and he had worked in construction for most of his life up to that point. Specifically, he was a subcontractor for restoration companies within the Chicagoland market. So what he would do is he would basically contract with the restoration company. The restoration company would actually get the work. They would get these massive fires, like, apartment building or a house or something like that. And then he was basically the laborer / the subcontractor that would, split it 50-50, 60-40 with the restoration contractor and put it up back together. And, '08 market kind of hit in. He had a workers' comp incident where a subcontractor of a subcontractor had fallen off a roof. And due to that, he got dropped from his workers' comp. And because he got dropped from his workers' comp, he no longer could engage in the subcontracting agreement. So he moved on. '08 was obviously a prime time to buy real estate. He moved on, started flipping real estate. He got into trucking. He did all the blue collar things that a man trying to serve his family and make sure he feeds his family well does. And that's kind of everything building up to the conversation where we were sitting on a beach in Mexico, and he was thinking of another business idea. And he was really attracted by fast food restaurants because free flow and cash flow, things like those. And he pitched me that idea. And I'm like, Dad, you have all this experience in construction, right? Like, why don't we go back into construction and the idea of, either restoring homes or something like that? And he told me, well, we had that workers' comp incident, but I also can't really sell. Like, I don't want to do the subcontracting thing again. And I'm not a good salesperson, so I can't sell to the consumer. And at the time I had sold, shirts for a printing and promotional material company. I had sold homes on snow removal. Like, I considered myself a semi-decent salesman. I'm like, look, you know the ins and outs of how to build stuff. I can sell. So let's give it a shot. And that's kind of where it started. It was on that beach. We said, okay, we'll give it a shot. We've got nothing to lose. And the goal was for both of us to get 2 fires a year, basically, and just do like fire reconstruction. And, the math was simple. It was about $1 million of gross revenue with $100,000 each for us. We'd work with our hands, and it was great. So then I started trying to look for the fires, did things like fire chasing, did things like, we paid for some leads and things like those. And I realized that it was very hard to chase fires and sign up fires unless you had like relationships and things like those. And I realized that every single company that would show up to the fire scene had something along the lines of emergency services or board up or, full service restoration. And the light bulb lit up. Like, if we want to sell these fires, we need to have the ability to provide full services. So that's kind of where the idea of emergency services within Romextera, which was our company name, came about. And we then started doing water mitigation work, things like those. We really didn't get to our dream of fires for a couple of years down the road, but we got all these water damage jobs, things like those. And we had a good run with it. We scaled to over 8 figures within about 6.5 years. We had, by the time I had left, we had our own building. It was a 22,000 square foot facility within Addison that we, custom built. We had just under 60 employees. We had about 30 trucks, couple thousand pieces of equipment. And it was great. And the business was basically running by itself. We had built up a leadership team and had a general manager involved as well. But I kind of glossed over a lot just to open it up back to questions, because you know your viewers more than I do. And I don't want to sit here and tell a 5-hour story. So
no, man, I think so 6 years. First of all, what caught my attention is immediately when you said you started noticing. I think all good business owners and leaders, they're very perceptive. They pay attention to the communication coming from their team. They pay attention to what the market's communicating, how people are responding. And the fact that you said, okay, they had emergency service, full service, board up. These were things you were looking as indicators to lead you to the right direction. One thing I've noticed is you don't have to be an inventor to be successful in business. You just have to know what's working, and you have to borrow what's working and implement it. I mean, the same strategies in different industries will work in other industries. All right. So 6 years, 8-figure business. Tell us about some of the obstacles that you came across that you had to overcome, because obviously you and your dad weren't the only ones making an 8-figure business income. So building the team, we hear from our community, is one of the hardest things to do. How did you find those leaders in your company so that you could have something that was running on its own?
Yeah. So the biggest obstacle was actually growing and graduating from the down in the trenches, you do everything phase, and working your way up to, you basically don't do anything. You do strategy, vision, you're buying buildings, buying equipment, things like those. And I think the biggest hurdle that entrepreneurs go through is they have a lot of self-limiting beliefs on how they see things, and they become the biggest bottlenecks of their business. And you have to like break through that. It's almost uncomfortable. What I mean by that is, earlier on in the business, I was selling, I had a couple of helpers, I was doing the work, running the truck, did absolutely everything, right? And in my vision, what I was doing was 100% perfect. And then every single time I'd hire somebody to help me out with something or get a new employee, it felt like they were less than my version of 100%, right? A good project manager was only a project manager. They didn't want to go out in the field and get dirty. A good salesperson was just a salesperson. They didn't want to do any other things, right? And I struggled with the perception and the self-limiting belief, I guess, of why can't they do it as good as I am? Am I God? Quickly, I find out that like I was very superficial. I was broad, but not super deep. And I wasn't an expert in anything. I was jack of all trades. But I quickly also learned that 80% of something being done by somebody else is actually way better than 100% of it done by you. And that was the hardest thing to figure out, like start learning to trust technicians to go do the work. They might not, the first thing was that, like, trust a crew chief and a technician to go do the actual physical work without you being there and feeling like you have to be on site. Like, that was mind blowing because we took a lot of pride in our work. We wanted to be there for the customer, things like those. But it's like, you can't grow a business if you're sitting there actually doing the work, right? A 10-hour mitigation job means that you're there for 10 hours, right? So that was step number one. Then step number two was getting out of even seeing the job, selling the job, supervising the job. And again, that's also a control issue, right? You're telling me that now I have to have project managers go out there, see the job, sign the job, sell the job. And if they make mistakes, I pay for it. I'm liable for it. So that was very tough. And then once you learn all that, you get to the next step where now you have to build a team that builds the business, and you work through that leadership team of, at the beginning, it'll look something like a department manager, production manager, an office manager. So you have to build these other people and then try to teach them everything you've learned about letting go of control. They probably face the same issues if you're, building people up, of teaching them how to let go of the control and things like those, and work on the business. So the biggest obstacle was working with myself, and particularly because I was partnered up with my dad, it was also working with my dad's self-limiting beliefs and the dynamic there. And the biggest thing we learned about is the more we can grow ourselves, the better the business became.
What did y'all's communication, yours and your dad's, look like? Because, I mean, at one level, it's like you just mentioned, any partnership, you've got to constantly be pushing past your own limiting beliefs and the other person's. But then there's that other dynamic of father son, and that's a whole nother level. Did y'all meet daily, weekly? How did y'all try to get past those so that you said, hey, it's time for us to hire a project manager and release this kind of pay, and take this kind of risk?
Yeah, it was an interesting relationship. Not only was it a father-son relationship, it was a first-generation immigrant that grew up in a completely different world. My father grew up in communist Romania, right, which was a completely different world than modern-day US. So, um, we butted heads a lot, and there was a lot of tension between the way I saw things and the way he saw things. But reflecting upon it, and even I would always say it, I thought it was the best partnership ever because we're father son, so trust is there 100% of the time, no questions asked. There's nothing but trust. Like we're blood, right? But the dynamic of the friction where I wanted to do something and I had to talk him into it, and he was hesitant, right? He was very conservative. It's like, hey, we have to hire a project manager. No, we're not going to hire a project manager because look, the bank account's low or XYZ. And then me having to talk him into that decision. It was great because I did all the homework and all the thought process, and I was able to flush out the idea prior to it actually happening. And had it not been for that check and balance, I might have jumped in and gotten super excited because I had quote unquote nothing to lose. I was young versus, he was way more conservative than I was. So I talk about it in my book. It's the Jack and George illusion in principle. And I mean, if you look at, how Disney was built, as Walt Disney was kind of the face, but there was also Roy Disney, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the concept of the perfect partnership, in my opinion, is two entrepreneurs that are like completely different and that can work well together with those completely opposing beliefs. And I think the magic happens in that middle ground, right? You typically have somebody that's super analytical, operations wise. He's like a quote unquote nerd, right? Maybe more conservative. And then you have the type A personality that's like a hungry tiger. They want to go out and sell, and they want to go crush, right? And mutually exclusively, those people would not do very well. The George of the world, which is the analytical person, will always struggle growing the volume of their business. They will always be a perfectionist. They would always be stuck at, oh, well, I need to have the perfect system, or, oh, I need to make sure that the client is treated this way. And then the alternate, which is Jack, and I coach these both types, that Jack person is going to have no problem getting to 8 figures of business, but they're going to grow the business that they're going to hate. They're going to grow a very painful business because they're not going to lay a foundation underneath. They're just going to sell. And then they're just going to sell their way out of their problems, basically, which just creates a bigger problem. So back to my father and I, what was super awesome was that there was a Jack and George dynamic. And even now at Albie, I know we didn't talk about what I do now, but even at the software company, this venture-backed software company I run, Shamoil is my co-founder. I'm kind of the face. I'm out here. There's a whole team behind me. Like, it's not just me, but specifically my equal co-founder who owns the same percentage of the company that I do. He's totally different. Super soft-spoken, super analytical, super organized, like completely opposite from what you see from me. And that dynamic is awesome. Like, hey, I want to raise venture capital. Whoa, dude, do you really want to do it? And then if I'm able to like actually think through it and convince him on it, then I know I made a good decision.
Okay, so take us from transition from the restoration company up into where you're at now with Albie, and explain to us kind of what Albie is.
Yeah, so that's actually really funny. My father always wanted to retire before age of 50. And I guess there was always a dream of mine to, hey, let's buy dad out. Bro Xterra was the forever thing, things like those. And one day I came up to him actually and told him, hey, I want to have an uncomfortable conversation. We had grown this company. It's a market leader. The past year, he'd been very hesitant over growing more, which maybe involved another office location and, up in Wisconsin and Michigan. The company had already gotten to a size where like, it wasn't bad. Like, it was great. It was cash flowing and it was pretty big, but it was also like for him, there was a lot of stressors like, there's 60 employees. When a workers' comp incident happens, he was emotionally attached to it. And he felt like, hey, I think we're good enough, right? We've gotten to 8 figures. We've gotten to these employees. I don't want to do this anymore. I felt like I'm young. I want to conquer the world, things like, do crazy things. I would have like franchised it or something else. So there was that kind of tone going on in the past year. And what had also happened during that past year is I had begun working with Shamoil, my current co-founder, on a software solution for our company. And the reason was there were really no software solutions within the restoration space that were catered to the restoration contractor. Most of them were catered to the insurance companies, and they would basically use the data of the contractor for the insurance companies. And we built this thing at the time. It wasn't a company. We built this thing called Albi, and our company, Rumextera, was running off of it. And we had success. We saw how it changed our business, and Shamoil and I decided, hey, we're going to go to market with it. And we decided to go to market with it, started picking up customers, and eventually we got approached by venture capitalists to take this company on the road to IPO, which we could talk about in a little bit. And I realized, okay, I had Rumextera and I had Albi, right? And I knew that I couldn't do two things and do them extraordinarily well. Like, they both required a decent amount of time. So fast forward to that conversation. Yeah. So fast forward to that conversation with my father. Hey, and I hated it, but hey, I'm not going to buy you out and you're not going to live happily ever after. You like this business anyway. I need you to take care of me, and I need to move on to do this better thing, which was Albiware. And he took it very well. He loved the idea. He was 100% supportive. I think deep down inside, he might have been a little bit hurt, but even up till this day, it was awesome. And the other great thing it did is it created an actual father-son relationship between me and him, because before, everything was all work. Dinner table was work. Everything else was work. Now we actually have that father-son relationship. But not to muddy the waters on the story. So moved on, sold out of Rumextera, moved on, started and founded Albiware with Shamoil. We got that VC money, and we kept building the product out. Currently, Albiware, I would say, is a market disruptor within the restoration industry. We've got about 4,000 restoration contractors collaborating on the platform. We just raised our Series A. We've raised about $10 million from various VCs, and we're just taking all that money and trying to build the best product that is 100% contractor focused for the restoration industry. And that is our passion.
So for you to exit the restoration company with your dad, how did you do that? Did he buy you completely out? Did he make payments? Was that a lump sum? How did that work for you to make that transition?
So most of the details, I guess, are undisclosed and confidential, but there was a lump payment and there was some sort of outside capital that helped him do that. But there's multiple different ways that that could be structured. I will also mention that the deal was very favorable for him due to the fact that no partner can just say, hey, I'm out, right? Like typically has to be an entire company liquidity event for a founder to get whatever it's worth. So it was a favorable transaction in his terms. But again, he was my father. We had built this great thing together. And I saw, it wasn't necessarily about the money for me.
How did y'all evaluate it?
Well, so we had been in the talks with many other people who had sold businesses. And there's this thing called an EBITDA multiple that gets placed on a company. And basically an EBITDA multiple, like right now, depending on your restoration company, it's somewhere between 5 to 8 times EBITDA. EBITDA is basically, to simplify it for listeners out there, you can go ask your accountant what your EBITDA is, but it's basically your net income. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. But to simplify it, it's very close to your net income that you report on your tax return, right? So typically there's a multiple that gets applied to that. Right now in the market, it's between 5 and 8, and that's typically the value of a restoration company. Now, there also is a caveat. Companies that do under $2 million of EBITDA are significantly less valuable than companies that do over $2 million of EBITDA. And that's just because the amount of companies within the market, the amount of potential buyers is significantly lower. So if you're doing less than $2 million of EBITDA, it's probably like in this blue collar millionaire group where you're probably only going to find a private buyer, right? A family office or an individual that wants to expand and purchase. Whereas once you get over that $2 million EBITDA, it unlocks private equity and it unlocks these larger institutional buyers in the restoration space. They'd be people like Blue Sky, people like ATI, so on and so forth. So, any questions?
No, that was good.
That's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
Incredible story.
Yeah. So it's typically the concept is when a buyer's coming to purchase your business, or when you talk about the value of that business, the reason it's an EBITDA multiple is it's, in essence, it's 5 to 8 years of future earnings. What buyers are doing, and that's how the public market works. That's how, even Albira would be bought. It's, how many years of future earnings am I willing to put up to acquire this company? Because the principle is, if I go within your market, it's going to take me 5 to 10 years maybe to build a company of your size, right? So I'd rather, instead of spending 5 to 10 years within your market to build up to your size, I'll just rather pay you, in advance 5 years of those earnings, run the business 0-0 for 5 years, and then obviously grow it. And I'm at that point. So it's very important for people who are buying, or for private equity people, to have some sort of strong conviction over what those future earnings would be. And I actually have a podcast with Jeff Moore from ATI, who acquired a bunch of restoration companies. I can give you guys the link. You guys can put it below. But there's a couple factors that go into it. And then I also have an Albi After Hours video, YouTube video, that I kind of dive into those factors. But things like EBITDA growth rate, like, is the revenue of the company consistently growing over time? That's important. The owner's involvement for these institutional capital guys, the less the owner's involved, the more valuable the company becomes. The overall profitability and the unit economics of the company is important. So, for every single dollar spent, how much are you making? And then, cost per acquisition is important. How much are you spending to acquire your customers? And an interesting fact that I learned actually throughout the journey was that in restoration, the restoration companies that get work independently versus the restoration companies that get 100% of the work from insurance is actually more valuable. The independent one's actually more valuable. And that's under the principle that you don't want a customer owning more than, owning a significant part of your revenue. Now, 20 to 30% is the number thrown out there. But if you're a gutter cleaning company, or if you're a carpet cleaning company, you're less attractive if most of your work is done with one customer. Let's say you have JLL on lockdown, or you have Blackstone on lockdown. You're doing all the Arby's restaurants, right? Well, you're not super valuable, because Arby's, you're one job away from losing that contract.
Absolutely.
Right? So sorry if I digress.
No, man.
No, I like it.
Extremely good breakdown. Very simply put, you can tell that you're a teacher, because you made it easy to understand. I want to know, what is some of the marketing strategies so you've had this restoration business, you grew it to 8 figures, and then you also took this Saas startup and took it to market. So explain to us on a level of marketing strategy what our blue collar listeners here with these businesses under $1 million EBITDA would benefit from in growing their businesses.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Early on, I would say, till we got to, $3-ish million of revenue, most of what we had dominated was online marketing. And I think it's very valuable to find a reputable online marketing provider and do things heavily. When you start off, they're going to be mostly paid. So they're going to be paid Google ads, Google My Business, things like those. Eventually, something called SEO will pick up, and your organic ratings will pick up. But what's very important for most blue collar people to understand is that the bottom line that counts, and the one thing you have to hold that person accountable to, is, what is my cost per qualified lead? So what is my cost for me or my sales team to get in front of a qualified prospect that really could use my services? And a lot of SEO, PPC providers want to like monkey the water out and talk about impressions, talk about website clicks, talk about all these things. Those really don't matter. Like when you go, you literally need to say, hey, look, my average job size is $5,000. I would say 10 to 15% is what you should spend, depending on your margins. Again, if you're a high margin business, maybe more, maybe less. But in most blue collar worlds, 10 to 15% is acceptable to pay for cost per acquisition. So basically you have to say, and you also have this track record of 1 out of 2 jobs you may close, right? So in the example of your job is $5,000 and you close 1 out of 2 jobs, you need $10,000 worth of opportunity to close $5,000, right? So, and you want to spend about 10 to 15% of that on acquisition. So you can spend $500 for $10,000 worth of opportunity, and that's all you care about. Now, the mistake people do is they expect results within the first 30 days. I would say any person, you want to take a like 3 to 6 month bet. But if within 3 to 6 months they're not working out, you have to kind of move on. And it doesn't matter that your website looks pretty, and nothing else matters other than the qualified opportunities that you're getting in through the door. Then what you're going to realize is you could only get so much out of a market, depending on how big, like again, $3 to $4 million in like a bigger city like New York, Chicago, Dallas. I see some clients that I coach in small cities, struggle to get past the $1 million to $1.5 million mark. So I have a client in Salt Lake City who started needing to diversify. And then you have to think, okay, where do my potential prospects hang out? Or where do those potential prospects, what do they have in common? So in restoration, one of the examples was every single person who has water damage in their basement has an insurance agent. Most people whose toilets overflow have a plumber that comes out to help them out. Most people have a realtor who helps them purchase the house. And then it's the concept of relationship marketing, which is basically, if you take it in the software world, it's affiliate marketing, it's referral marketing, it's all the same thing. It's how can I go out to people that are in common with my customers and convince those people to refer me. And that's actually something we had a roofing side of our business. If you're a roofer that chases wind and hailstorms, right? How can you go out to insurance agents and have insurance agents refer you? So then when the scammy door knocker knocks on the homeowner's door, the homeowner is going to call their insurance agent, and then the insurance agent's then going to call you. If you're a carpet cleaner or if you're a gutter cleaner, what about, property management companies? What about realtors or home inspectors throughout the area, right? And then the concept is you go out and you build relationships. Relationships require a value proposition. So you need to have something other than refer me because I do a great job. Or a lot of times blue collar people just take so much pride in their work and their reviews and things like those. It's like, no, you have to flip it around to what's in it for that referral party. Property manager, you need to refer me because I know you have a pain with contractors because typical contractors do X, Y, Z, and that is painful for you. I will make that pain go away if you call me. Insurance agent, I know you have a pain every single time a customer calls with a claim, right? You can call me anytime. It doesn't matter if it's a BS claim or not. I will go out there and I will deal with your customer for you. And the principle of marketing is it's whiffed. It's what's in it for them. And oftentimes we're so center focused and we want to pitch our BBB A+ rating and our 5-star Google reviews and all that stuff. But it doesn't resonate for the customer. You're just regurgitating information. So you read books, you accumulate knowledge, they ask, you answer, by the way you sell are 2 like simple introductory sales and marketing books that I think every blue collar person should implement. It just blows your mind. And, oh, I was doing this all wrong. The prospect did not care about my BBB A+ rating. Because like if I went to you, Chris, and I said, hey, I'm BBB A+ rated, what would you say?
I didn't even hear you. It went in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, nobody cares.
Exactly. So, hopefully that answers your question.
No, that was extremely to the point. That you're
Alex, what were the books you recommended right there?
They Ask You Answer by Marcus Sheridan is one of them. So Marcus Sheridan started a pool company in the recession and he was about to go bankrupt. And he just started writing articles from the customer's point of view, just starting to educate customers. And he turned his pool company been around during the housing recession. Like it went crazy, like multiple 8 figures. And now he's a very popular motivational speaker and things like those. And then By the Way You Sell. I don't know who the author of that is off the top of my head. So
I've not read either one of those, so I'll have to pick those up.
Me either.
yeah,
That's
no,
excellent.
they're great.
I agree. So people come to me sometimes because I do a lot of bigger jobs, and they're trying to get the pressure washing jobs, and I wish they heard what you just said. I almost want to help them. Like, bro, that's horrible. Like they tell me what's in, like, all about themselves, what it's in for them, and I just zone out. They need to
Yeah.
figure out what my pain point is and why do I want to do it? Because otherwise the risk is I'm just sending you work and you're going to ruin my name. Like, why would I do that?
100%.
And or they'll say something like, "I'll hook you up." I don't need to be hooked up. I'm already hooked up. Tell me something better.
It's the law of reciprocity. I mean, if you'll bring and lead with value first, you'll get it back. I mean, the main point of what you just went over, Alex, is you're clarifying who your referral avatar is, who your customer avatar is, and then you're clarifying what their problems are, and you just start talking to their problems. And it's extremely powerful because it turns it around on your prospect. You start talking to your prospect instead of, like you said, talking about yourself. I mean, it's a completely different way of communicating.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from your marketing, kind of give me some information about Saas. We see all of the exits and these massive multiples on these type ventures, and what did it look like getting this software developed out while you were still owning the business, and what does it look like right now as you're trying to build the support behind it and get the market awareness? And then give us a little idea of what your projection is, what your end goal is for this.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the first thing about Saas that I'll note, well, a couple of things. We can, let the cat out of the bag. And yes, Saas multiples were absolutely bananas. They, 2020, 2021, 2022, Saas companies were selling for, 15 to 20 times revenue. So in the equivalent of a restoration company, that's like 100 times EBITDA. Right. Wow, that's crazy. Now, what I will let you know about Saas is you're building this product, right, that eventually you're launching to this market. And most software companies don't get to what's called product market fit, where the product actually makes sense for the market and they die. And the second thing that really even caught me by surprise was $1 million to build an MVP is not a lot of money. Building software right, like it's so front end loaded. I remember it took like 4 to 5 months to just have a login screen. And I remember my CTO came to me and, he brought his laptop, opened it up. He's like, "Dude, check this out." And it was like 4 months of us working together. And he's like, "Put in your username, put in your password." And I log in and it's a blank screen. I'm like, "Okay, it's a blank screen." He's like, "Yeah, we created all the infrastructure. We created the database and the user database and the credentialing and stuff like that." So, yeah, it's a very interesting business. It's very tough. You have to have higher motivations than just having a business. It's not really cash flowing either, right? It's a long run business, whether you're bootstrapped or venture backed, where you don't have free cash flows. But the goal is two main goals I have, and they're in our vision statement and mission statement. One is bringing a product to the market. So the restoration and home service market is very underserved by software because there really aren't a lot of investors that consider us sexy enough or worthy of investment. So it was kind of like my ambition to build a product, a Tesla-like product. Think of the Tesla experience when you walk up to, the Tesla with your phone in your pocket and you open it up, stuff like that, for restoration contractors. Because I think something simple like an iPhone or like a Tesla would actually be adopted versus something clunky like what exists on the market right now. It doesn't get used and people get frustrated about tech because it's outdated, right? And then the second thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to create a vehicle through which 30 to 50 other people can have the same type of life-changing event that I have had, right? So I've been blessed with abundance. I've been blessed with, the ability to create value in the world and have it recognized by others. And I realized like, I want to share that. I want to build a team that they can also experience that same thing. And in order for 30 to 50 people to experience that, unfortunately for us, the company has to be big enough and has to be of scale to check both of those boxes. So basically, we are on the IPO road. We raise venture capital, then we go back and we build and we acquire more customers, and every single department does their job. And then, we go back and raise some more capital and then keep building and building and building. So
explain what venture capital is and kind of what that journey looked like to get their attention.
Yeah. So in the capital markets, there's a couple of different types of, I guess, capital institutions or financial institutions. And typically you'll see like private equity companies. If you want to learn more about private equity companies, there's this book called 2 and 20, and it talks about how they work. But they all kind of work under the same premise. Their companies or institutions or funds, the three of us set out, we go find a bunch of limited partners. And limited partners are basically people that have a ton of money. And they could be institutions, they could be, the Gates family and things like those. And I raise money from those limited partners as a venture capitalist or as a private equity firm under a thesis, under the idea that, hey, home service is booming right now. We want to invest there. I'm a home service expert. Chris is a financial expert. Kevin is a whatever expert, right? And we raise all this money, and then we want to go out and find companies to invest in. And we want to, we start out with $100 million. We want to turn that $100 million into 5 to 10x in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So that's basically what venture capital companies do. And they basically then their deal flow, just like for you and I, a sale would be, we go to a customer's home and clean their carpets, and that's a transaction. Their deal flow is they deploy that capital into a company. And they basically vet out all these different companies and they underwrite the risk and they try to find the companies that they're going to give more of a return. The biggest difference between venture capital, there's venture capital, growth equity, private equity. Venture capitalists, they're more like they pray and spray. So they play in games where the multiples are high and they'll invest in 100 companies with the hope that only 2 of those 100 will turn into IPO companies and it'll return the entire fund. Private equity companies typically they expect lower returns. So the venture capital company will look for like a 100x return on one company. The private equity company might look for a 3 to 5 times return on the majority of the companies. So that's kind of the difference between the different areas of the market. Now, I do want to make another note. I was actually in Reno this weekend, and I went out with a board member of mine. And he's a young dude, probably 30 some. He's successfully raised a ton of money and sits on the board of even a company called Equipment Share, which is a pretty large company. And he was telling me that the LP sentiment, the limited partners I told you, the people with money, is shifting a little bit. So capital has gotten so much more expensive because interest rates have gone up that limited partners are not as interested in investing, which is bad for me, in those super bubbly, high multiple businesses. And they're kind of transitioning and shifting over to more interested in free cash flowing businesses like the home service businesses. Mm-hmm. So they're actually right now raising a fund. It's going to be $100 million fund that they're just going to scoop up large pieces of equipment like bobcats and things like those. And then I did tell him about the unit economics of restoration when I was talking with them and things like those. And he was like, these are very interesting things for the market right now. So there is a shift from almost, it's like we went from these up high in the sky, SpaceX, Tesla, Facebook ideas to, oh, wait, the real world actually makes the world go round. And there's a lot of money that's now moving into logistics, into construction, into home services and that. So it's a really interesting time for people like you and I.
I think I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Grant Cardone, I heard him say one time, follow the money. And if you watch what the big money is doing, they're putting all of their money into the Main Street type businesses, those home service businesses. And you're hearing that echo more and more often about where the tradespeople, these massive companies buying up Main Street small businesses and putting them underneath their umbrella. So we just need to listen and pay attention to where the money's going and understand that's the opportunity right now.
Yep.
The blue collar world is in such a great position to increase their market share by buying up these smaller businesses that aren't being looked at as roll-ups. And then the ones that have specialties look to own their own business, not through an acquisition and not a startup, because it's like you said, when it goes back to the multiple and how they're factoring, okay, well, I'm just going to buy this for the next 5 to 8 years of earnings. Well, the thing you didn't say is they're also mitigating their risk, because a business that has got that type of revenue has instant cash flow. But not only that, they've got a brand, they've got employees, they've got leaders inside of that business that you don't have to have that one-man show. So it's pretty incredible time. I'm 30, I'll be 39 this year. And I didn't really start playing the game of business till I hit about 30. And I'm looking at this thinking, man, what an incredible time to live through right now. What an amazing opportunity to not have to have an 8-year degree to be able to make millions of dollars. Literally,
Yep.
you could have no formal education, but you could have some experience or be specialized in a particular area, and you could walk into millions of dollars.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's pretty awesome.
it is. Alex, I got a few questions. I know you answered one, but I lost. How long did it take you and your dad from start to when you exited the company? How many years was that?
It's under 6.5 years.
Okay. And then your CRM now, how many people do you have on that right now?
How many people, like users?
You
4,000.
users, sorry.
Yeah. Yes, 4,000.
Wow. Okay. What is the software? What's the EBITDA now on software companies like yours that create CRMs and stuff, and how has that changed over the last couple of years?
So it depends on what kind of software companies. So there's bootstrap software companies that basically don't grow as fast, but they're basically reinvesting their free cash flow into their business. And then there's venture-backed software companies like ours. Venture-backed software companies are always going to be significantly negative EBITDA. Like we're like negative 300% EBITDA. And the reason behind that is we're basically using investor money. They're paying for the future cash flows, right? So we're using the investor money to inject into a larger sales organization that's ramping up. Like and that sales organization will eventually produce, right? And same thing with engineering and product and stuff like that. So most venture-backed software companies, you expect them to be negative cash flowing until they, a software company takes off and then it starts leveling off. So we're still in that takeoff phase where like we're growing 3x year over year, 3 to 4x year over year. We've done that already this will be our 4th year. No, our 3rd year. Sorry.
So I would like to, so I know you do some coaching, some teaching, you got some stuff coming out as well, specific for the restoration industry. This last few moments of this interview, I would love to hear what you would communicate to a company, a blue collar business that's grossing around the million and a half or less than mark. Kind of what some of the business mechanics that's going to give them the quickest lift so that they can start seeing major growth and they can get to a level that institutional money would look at them for an exit.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. There's a ton. So
Right.
I won't take too much time. But I think most blue collar people probably listening right now have no idea where they're going. Right. And we just solidified that $2 million of EBITDA is where there's the most demand for institutional capital, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a blue collar person listening right now and you don't know where you're going, charting out the course to $2 million EBITDA, right? $10 million of revenue, or 10xing your business over the next 5 to 6 years needs to be crystal clear. And you need to think of a way of how am I going to go and get there, right? Because having a mission, vision, and something that you're working towards the future is the first thing that you need that most people just don't have. Parentheses. I sit down with my team every single day and I talk with them about these things. And I sat down with one of my salespeople. I'm like, hey, what's your 5-year vision? Oh, I want a house and a car and kids and things like those. I'm like, you can have that in 6 months. He just put an offer on a house 3 months later, right? Their vision isn't big enough, right? Mm-hmm. They don't think big enough. They don't think that they could do this because we have so many self-loaded beliefs. Our parents tells us we're not good enough. Our society tells us it's impossible. There's all these things. So the first thing is solidify where you're going and commit to it. And it has to be something super crazy that when you go home to your spouse and you tell your spouse, hey, I'm going to sell this company for $10 million in the next 5 years, she's going to tell you, shut the fuck up. Right? Like, it needs to be wild. Right? Yeah. So that's one. Two is identifying that you're the biggest bottleneck of your business. And no matter how big or how small you are, stop doing the things that don't bring value and don't light you up. Simple. Like, if you can't afford it, you can't afford an offshore VA. Let's say you can't afford an executive assistant like I do who makes, close to 6 figures, right? Great. But you can afford an offshore VA. Answering the phone maybe doesn't light you up. Doing your books doesn't light you up. Things like these. Get yourself out of everything that doesn't light you up and focus 100% on just what lights you up and what brings you value, right? Because you can tell a complete difference of you going and talking to a property manager about your business. And there's a complete difference between that and you doing taxes, right? Or you doing your books, right? When you're like, oh, I fucking have to do this, right? You're not like, that time is not being spent to generate anything. It's not building value. Just find a way to get rid of it and find a way to like literally back to back. And I'll share with everybody my calendar, but like everything I do is lighting me up. You can see how lit up I am right now. So doing those things, having the plan of where you're going, I'm going to go to $10 million, splitting it up year by year, setting those goals, and 2, focusing on those things and buying back your time, basically, which is another good book, Buy Back Your Time. I think I sent it to you. I think are the 2 things that, like, if you do, you'll experience significant results. And I had a guy who I coach. I'm not going to name him, but he is the George in my book. And he was like, he called me up one year. It was actually December of last year. And he told me, hey, I want you to give me some advice on selling my business. I'm like, cool, great. What's your revenue figure, stuff like that. Oh, I do $500,000 a year. Okay. What's your bottom line? Like, I don't know, 50 grand. I'm like, dude, like, you're going to do an asset sale. Like, there's no value there. Like, why do you want to sell your business? And then he tells me about, like, he's been there. He's been stuck for 5 years, things like those. He's been trying to grow the business. He's in debt. He just hates it. He can't get out. I'm like, hang on a sec. Let's work together. Let's give this a shot. And his biggest issue was sales. I'm like, all you need to focus on is sales. You're too overthinking things operationally. You're, super systems focused. You need to focus on what's going to take this business. You have to grow through that million. Like, there's $1 million to $2 million ceiling where, like, the business just sucks. You just grow through and bust through that. And just by focusing on that, having a vision, I made him do a 5-year vision, right? And his vision is X. I'm not going to share it here. And then finding out what he needs to get there, which was sales, and then focusing on that. And then he offshored his office stuff. He gave away his billing to some sort of company that does his billing for him and things like those. And all he did was focus on sales. He hired a PPC provider. He started banging on insurance agents' doors. And then he took one of his crew chiefs, and whenever the crew chiefs, the person doing the work, didn't have time to do work or was slow, he sent that person to go out and build relationships too. And he's on track right now. So he did 400,000 last year. He's on track for like 1.2 this year. So it's almost awesome. 3 times the growth. And it's just focusing on the right things. So he's had moments, sorry to interrupt, but he's had moments where, oh man, I had to take another $5,000 out of my pocket to put it back into the business. I'm super stressed, things like that. I'm like, what's the big picture, George? What's the big picture? When you sell your business for $10 fucking million, does it matter that you borrowed $8,000? Yeah, but I already took $165,000 to buy this franchise off an SBA loan. I'm like, so? Like, that's 1% of your business value that you're building here. Doesn't matter. Focus on the big picture. Go get it, right? So
I think that's an amazing way to end this, because you just clarified it. It's focusing on the one catalyst point that's going to move your business forward. And I think also another thing to mention is that's why you need to get around a mentor, a coach, whatever you want to call them. You need someone else with clean, clear eyes that can say, here is your problem. You're focusing on the wrong focus. And that's what you did for the George. Alex, man, Kevin, you got any more questions before we end it? I mean, this has been great.
Nah, Alex, this was really interesting. I learned a lot of stuff. This was great.
I'm glad.
Yeah. So look,
can you tell us about your book and then put that in the comments?
Yeah, I'll put it in the comments. So we finally titled it, and it's Restoration Millionaire is what it's going to be called. The principles, though, will apply to the entire home service industry, and maybe eventually we'll do a spinoff. But like reading through those principles, we catered it towards restoration because that's where most of the stories come from. But I think any home service person can read into it, and who knows, maybe somebody will get inspired to start a restoration branch of their business off of it. So it is supposed to launch December 8th. I have a whole team kind of working on, all the ins and outs. We're at the second draft at the editor right now and getting the book cover done and all those things. But for anybody listening, just follow me on socials. It's Alex Duta is my social, and you can find me on, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. So
I'm going to just say the books. Anytime I see a really smart, successful guy talk about just a few books, I always write them down and read them. Oh, yeah. He said, "Buy Back Your Time" was one. The other one is They Ask and You Answer. They ask, you answer. And then, by the way, you sell.
Yep. And then the 2 and 20 is the private equity book that talks to you about how private equity works. And like out of all of those, the number one thing, if you're on this podcast, that I would recommend is you read actually Buy Back Your Time. So Dan Martell is actually my mentor. I pay him to coach me. And he wrote the book, Buy Back Your Time. And again, based on the things that light you up, and the number one thing at the scale, it's like, how can you literally buy back your time and not do things that don't light you up and don't bring value in the world?
No,
it's too short.
I read that book, and it is probably, I agree with you. It's the number one thing if you own a business, you need to read, because it absolutely straight. Alex, man, I appreciate your time. I know that our listeners you've changed some lives today. You've made an impact, and I know that's a big goal in your life at this point from last time we spoke. Looking forward to seeing the success of Albiware. Anybody in the disaster cleanup, mitigation, restoration business, y'all check out his software. And dude, the next time we talk.
Absolutely.
Thanks
so
Alex.
much, Chris. Kevin, it was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
Take care.